Modern Biochemistry on Steroids with Ryan Root. Today we're talking about DHB, dihydroboldenone. Ryan, you're back in the house, brother. You're the biochemist. I want to hear about this, your perspective. Let's break it down structurally. Let's talk about the history of this drug.
Okay. Yeah. So DHB or dihydroboldenone, also known as 1-testosterone. This was it was labeled as a pro-hormone, kind of a manipulative marketing strategy done by supplement companies. They got around the 1990 Steroid Control Act by labeling this a pro-hormone instead of an actual androgenic compound. It's definitively anabolic and androgenic. It's not a pro-hormone. So yeah, it's in the 2004, it was entered into the 2004 Anabolic Steroid Control Act. So now it is illegal, or a Schedule III controlled substance.
Let's talk about anything more about the history of where you could find. I know you were telling me that you tried to find out, like where it really came from. Like, we look back at all the classic steroids, like Dianabol. We have a specific author. We have like the companies back in the 50s. Can you find anything on this, like where it came from the industrial aspect?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. I can't. There isn't a lot of information on the history of this substance. I can't find a person who first synthesized it. I couldn't find an exact date. There has been no known clinical uses. It was simply marketed as a pro hormone.
And we know that
2005.
right, and you and I, this is October 2023. We know that it's out there in the streets in the last couple. I know Greg Doucette did a video 2019, everyone, but it's been out there, but it's out there more and more. And I've never done a video on it, so I have the opportunity to have this, this person in my life that's really an expert in understanding anabolic steroids from the biochemical standpoint. So let's go back. We got the history, which is minimal as far as how it kind of entered this world,
Yeah.
not structurally or industrially like Dianabol or Anavar.
Yeah.
We have this very long history. Talk about this is the cool stuff for these guys, and you're the guy to answer it. Chemical structure. Let's go into that.
Yeah, so the chemical structure is very interesting. So it's called dihydroboldenone DHB, which is it's a 5-alpha reductase version of boldenone, right? So it's the 5-alpha reductase version. So similar to DHT, testosterone 5-alpha reductase into testosterone 5-alpha reduces into DHT. But DHT has more of a kinetic physiology, kinetic binding affinity to the androgen receptor than testosterone. However, in muscle cells, there isn't a lot of 5-alpha reductase enzymes, and there's also an enzyme that deactivates DHT in muscle cells, right? However, this enzyme does not deactivate DHB. So DHB is allowed, and the rest of the DHT derivatives, such as primobolan, oxandrolone, that none of them are deactivated by this enzyme that deactivates DHT in the muscle cells. So that's why they're allowed to have their anabolic physiology in the muscle. So that's why a lot of these DHT derivatives are very potent. Dihydroboldenone being one of them. So when we look at the chemical structure, very interestingly enough, it's very similar to boldenone. It's just missing one double bond. And missing this double bond adds 2 hydrogens to the first ring of the anabolic compound structure. So therefore, that's why it's dihydro, right? 2 hydrogens. It's got 2 added hydrogens, dihydroboldenone. So interestingly enough, boldenone is very similar to methandrostenolone or D-bol, right? The only difference between boldenone and methandrostenolone is the C17 alkylation. Most orals are C17 alkylated, which allows it to survive digestion and prevents it from being filtered out by the kidneys. So it gets into the bloodstream through that C17.
Liver, right, liver.
Yes, sorry.
Whatever. That's okay. That's okay.
So yeah, so the C17 alkylation allows it to get into the bloodstream, right? And
Right.
so that's the only difference between boldenone and D-bol. And as we know, there's a big difference between the physiologic effect of boldenone and D-bol, and as it turns out, DHB is different than all of them as well. So we have three very minor differences in these compounds, and each compound is substantially different in its effect, anabolic effect on humans.
But it's not testosterone derived, is it?
No, so this is a DHB because it's a 5-alpha reduced version of boldenone is a DHT derivative.
Wow. Now tell us right now for all the guys that are bro science, real extreme bro science guys, they all know. Again, this is cool stuff, guys, because this is stuff doctors just don't know because you don't learn it in med school. But it's biochemistry and chemistry, and you could learn it. Steroid chemistry, right? Anabolic, not corticosteroid chemistry. And there's the three derivatives, right, of the world, right? There's TAST, NOR19,
Yeah.
and DHT derived, right?
Yeah.
Can you answer this from your perspective? Why in the world, this is like a universal question. In the 1930s and 40s and 50s into the 60s, those were the years of the anabolic steroid manufacturing chemistry. And they had no computers, okay? Why? Tell us from your perspective. We're going to sidetrack a little bit. We're going to get back on point here with the clinical aspects of DHB. Why is it that we have only three main categories of anabolic steroids in the world? I've always wondered that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess that these are the three that primarily bind to the androgen receptor. Now, is there another class that could develop that could also bind to the androgen receptor? And I guess
Right.
I guess that's a possibility, and maybe that's the future. Some of the future of steroids. Like
Right.
maybe there
This is
is
why we're
another,
doing.
another branch chain. But yeah, I haven't really explored deep into that. But that is interesting.
So you think, like you said, and we're going to get into the receptor side here. So let's go into the clinical, and that's another whole podcast for us.
Yeah.
Why do we have the three classes
Yeah,
of
and
anabolic
maybe
steroids?
SARMs fall into that, right? Because selective androgen receptors, like so, SARMs are like they selectively are agonist ligands to the muscle receptors, right?
But they're non-steroidal.
Yeah, right, right.
We don't. I don't. I mean,
Yeah, I
this is
don't,
why. But you got the guys. This is we're doing this for the. So
yeah,
we're two brains.
mhm,
I'm a clinical medical brain. You're a biochemical brain, and we're both into the world of steroids. So it's
yeah,
like it's cool for I want. This is not scripted, guy. This is
yeah,
not scripted.
yeah.
So all right,
That's a
this is
great
cool,
question.
guys. Let's keep moving. Clinical uses currently today. Let's go.
In the history, there's no known clinical uses of DHB, right? It was synthesized, and I can't find the exact date, but it was only used as a prohormone until it became illegal. Now it's just used as a PED, right? So there isn't a lot of information on this. Now there was one study conducted, and only one study, official study that was conducted, and it was conducted on mice. Now the study is very interesting. It found some interesting things. It did find that in this study, mice were orchiotomized, which means that they were essentially castrated, right? And so we had a control group of mice with intact testicles, castrated mice. Some were given testosterone propionate. Some were given DHB with no ester. Typically, DHB has the cypionate ester on it, but they were given it with no ester, which means that it's really fast acting, right? And then some were given like a control compound that did nothing, right? So in this study, it was found they measured the effect of these compounds on the levator NE muscle, which is, in my opinion, not a good muscle because it's not very active muscle, right? And
That's a leg muscle. Is that the leg foot muscle or something?
here it's like in your I don't know, like in your groin area.
Oh,
But
okay.
it's not utilized. It's not like a muscle that we utilize, often. So I think it's a bad muscle to use in the first thing. But anyway, so what was found is that testosterone was less anabolic, or there was less growth in the DHB. So let me go back and say what each of these mice were given. They were given 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight per day of. Some were given the testosterone propionate, some were the DHB with no ester, some the control. The ones in the control, or I mean with the testosterone propionate, showed more of this muscle growth of this levator and E muscle than with DHB, than with the equal amount of DHB. Now, so which is an indication, this is indicating that there's less anabolic effect of DHB than testosterone.
Wow.
We're going to find out that we find completely the opposite through a lot of anecdotal evidence, right? The other thing was the liver weighed a little more in the DHB group, indicating that possibly DHB is more hepatotoxic than testosterone. So, there's a few things here. One thing is that, what scientific theory and what one study says, there's there's a lot of difference between this and what we actually find in the field, right? Like
Right.
what a lot of empirical data and anecdotal data shows us in the field, and a lot of these studies done on mice are often do not translate to humans, right?
Right.
It's a good like starter, to give us some idea of how a compound is going to affect, because the chemistry, the neurochemistry, then the chemistry in mice is similar to humans.
We're mammals. Right.
Right, but it does not always translate. There's actually a huge one. So I find this really interesting. So one of the biggest things that proves this is IGF-1. If you remember back in I can't remember, I think it was in the 90s, there was a study done on mice with IGF-1, and IGF-1 was incredibly anabolic to white mice, right? And so all these articles were written when we saw this one study come out that, oh my gosh, HGH, because it induces the production of IGF-1, and IGF-1 as it became available in the LR3, IGF-1 LR3, as it became available, a lot of articles were written that were praising the anabolic potential of this chemical. So everybody thought HGH and IGF-1 were going to be incredibly anabolic. In fact, today, if you still ask a novice, what does HGH or IGF-1 do to you? They will say, oh yeah, it helps you build big muscles, right? And that's still because of this myth that was created from this white mice study. Any bodybuilder, anybody in the hormone industry knows that HGH and IGF-1, if it's anabolic at all, it's very, very minute, right? There's really no anabolism to it. So, shortly after that study came out, and throughout the world, this almost myth started about the anabolic potential of HGH and IGF-1, and bodybuilders and people in the hormone industry knew pretty quickly that that's not the results. So it is anabolic in mice, it's not. So the difference between how IGF-1 reacts in mice and humans is very different.
So are you thinking, just as we're running a little bit of on the side here, guys? It's okay. We're going to a cool place here for a moment. Like you're saying that IGF and growth hormone is not anabolic with these steroid users.
Yeah,
What's the benefit? What's the benefit?
Well, it helps a lot of other things. It helps with, one of the main things it does. I mean, it does regenerate all cells of all organs. One of the main benefits of it, including the skin cells, which is why it kind of makes you look a little younger, it promotes the production of elastin instead of collagen. Collagen is more the scar tissue, is what we start producing as we get older. That's why we look younger. But all the organs tend to regenerate from HGH. The IGF, one of the main functions it does is it makes the body switch from using the glucose in your blood and your glycogen as a primary source of energy to using your fat stores as a primary source of energy. There's HGH receptors on your adipose tissue. So, and it helps these go through lipolysis, making you use your fat stores more.
So it burns. So growth hormone with the body. I'm trying to get my head around.
Yeah.
The guys are going to say, what are these guys talking about? It's not anabolic. But when the steroid users are on so many other drugs and they're using growth hormone, how do you really know, they're just using. So, this is why the studies are very needed but they're on so much polypharmacy, you can never tease out
Yeah.
what's going. So, I think it's known, that again, it does. Growth hormone and IGF are ancillary to bodybuilder regimen because it tears off body fat.
Yes, yeah. So I like to call them a fine tuner, right? So it's if you're already, if you're using the anabolic compounds and you have a specific look that you're going for, and if it's time to step on stage or you want to go, then almost nothing's better than HGH or IGF
Wow.
to really fine tune that muscle definition, to really get
Wow.
rid of that subcutaneous fat and really, but in and of itself, it's not, if it's anabolic at all, it's not very much.
I've heard it before. I've always wanted to keep my mouth shut about that because I didn't have the time or the expertise to go into the chemistry and the biochemistry. I'm a clinical doctor, but I was like, seems like growth hormone is being used wildly for its anabolic recovery. But that's a whole nother topic. All right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was cool. That was a cool.
There's a lot of other benefits to
Yeah.
HGH and
But that was cool, though. That was really cool sidetrack.
Yeah.
So let's get back into tell me from your perspective in the streets right now, where do you think this drug's being used? How's it being used orally, intramuscularly? And then let's talk about the good, the bad, side effect. Let's go.
So again, the scientific theories and studies are not necessarily indicative of what we're actually going to see in the field, right? So that's why all this empirical and anecdotal data is actually more important than what one study says or what a
I
scientific
agree.
says.
I agree.
So what are we seeing in the field? So we're seeing that DHB does seem to be in fact much more anabolic than testosterone and boldenone. Because it's a DHT derivative, it does not convert to estrogen, so it does not.
Dry. Yeah, dry.
Yeah, it's not dry. So interesting. Let me go back to the study for one more time. So this was a very interesting part of the study that is proving true with the anecdotal evidence, right? The study actually determined which receptors DHB had an affinity for, and it studied the glucocorticoid receptor, the progesterone receptor, and the mineralocorticoid receptor, which mineralocorticoid receptor is usually stimulated by aldosterone, right? So it proved not to have an affinity, a specific high affinity for the glucocorticoid receptor, or the progesterone receptor, but it did have an affinity of significance to the mineralocorticoid receptor, which again, aldosterone would normally affect. Now, it wasn't necessarily a high affinity, but it was an affinity of significance. So what we are seeing in the field is that although that, again, DHB is more anabolic than testosterone and boldenone, it is considered a dry steroid because it does not convert to estrogen. But in higher doses, it does affect the mineralocorticoid receptor, which makes your kidneys retain sodium, right? It controls the sodium content.
Hypertension, right?
Right.
With
So it can cause water retention, an inflammatory response, which increases blood pressure, right? So what we are seeing in higher doses is people who are sensitive to this mineralocorticoid receptor are seeing high CRP levels. They are seeing inflammatory responses, and they are seeing blood pressure increase.
Now, is this guys that are just doing this? Let's talk about that for a minute. Like, that's going to be bad, right? That's not good. But this, you just touched on something that if you're doing super physiologic, men that are doing super physiologic doses of tren, equipoise, dianabol, even testosterone, you're not going to see elevated CRP levels because I check CRP, but you see elevated blood pressure. And if your blood pressure is elevated and you start to get heart disease, you're going to see an increase in highly sensitive CRP. So it's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's a whole vicious. So where did you see that, though, where you saw anecdotally where the CRPs and inflammation were up?
Yeah, so I honestly, not only do I contact a lot of people who I know who do this, but I also just go and read voraciously about anecdotal evidence.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, and when you just start seeing a trend, right, of
Right.
100 or 1,000 different,
Right.
you start seeing a trend. So again, it's not with everybody. There's some people who can take now because DHB is pretty anabolic. Like the levels are pretty low. Like 200 is still like a maximum
Yeah.
high moderate dose. Anything above 200 seems to start causing problems for people. 200
How
milligrams.
do they use it? Give us this typical cycle of DHB, how it's used.
Well, so a lot of people, combine it with another steroid because again, it's a DHT derivative, so there's no estrogen conversion. You do need the estradiol, so it's still it's still important to combine with testosterone. So a lot of people combine it with like testosterone or maybe a few other things. And it like boldenone is known to control estrogen. But one of the theories of the way that, even though it's not directly known, one of the theories and one of the ways that makes sense to me is that boldenone aromatizes an estriol, not estradiol, and that competes with estradiol for the receptors, right? So you don't get the estradiol adverse side effects. However, you do need estradiol, so that may be a negative effect of boldenone, right?
Right.
Now, DHB does not convert to any estrogen because it's a DHT derivative, so you don't have that effect. So a lot of people will do testosterone and boldenone to reduce the estrogenic side effects, and then you can even add DHB to that.
Kind of like the Primo, kind of like Primo and Mastermind provide.
It's compared, yeah. So when we talk about related agents, it's compared a lot to a very very potent primobolan.
Wow.
Or it's actually compared not to testosterone, not to boldenone like you'd think, but more to trenbolone.
Wow.
So
Without the progestonic side effects.
so this is the interesting part, right? So now we're talking about, because we know from this study and from the anecdotal evidence that DHB seems to be an agonist to the mineralocorticoid receptor, not progesterone. Trenbolone is very progestinic. It does it does bind to the progesterone receptor. So people who are sensitive to progesterone can have side effects from that. So people who are very sensitive to the progestin effects of trenbolone may find that DHB is a better alternative for them
Wow.
than trenbolone. So it kind of comes down to, which works better for you, for each individual.
And the receptors. Tell me about your receptor theory.
Oh, about the future of steroids?
Yeah, I mean, like we'll just wrap up with that because I want to keep. We got so much more to do together, but this is
Yeah.
want to keep it kind of concise and
Yeah.
beautiful packet.
So, going back into the related compounds, so more people say that DHB is more related to trenbolone and the anabolic effects, they say it does not seem to have for everybody the thermogenic effects that trenbolone has. So the night sweats aren't as bad, although people do say that they can have them. It doesn't cause quite the insomnia again, but this is all individualized. So some people do notice these effects. Some people do have some of the mental side effects that trenbolone can cause. A lot of people say they don't. It's not quite as pronounced. Again, if trenbolone doesn't work for you, maybe DHT.
How about sex? How about the sex? Trend is like crazy sex and all this.
For some people, right? So that's the interesting part, and that will kind of take us into what I think about all these different receptors, right? Some people, the progestinic side effect, they need progesterone for libido, so the progestinic side effects actually give them more of a libido, and for some people it does the opposite, right? The NOR19s can also cause erectile dysfunction and lack of libido, and it's my thought that a lot of that is caused by, are you sensitive to the progesterone receptor or are you not? So it's kind of like a progestinic nature. So,
Wow.
so taking this even deeper, the future of steroids, like I can see, us starting to put all these steroids into a group. Which receptors does each steroid is an agonist for, right?
Right.
And that way people can start labeling themselves as, well, I'm sensitive to progesterone, or I'm not sensitive to progesterone. I'm really sensitive to the estrogenic side effects. I'm sensitive to cortisol or glucocorticoid receptors or the aldosterone. Some people can take really high dose of DHB and have no CRP and no inflammatory response.
Right.
Some people get a very high inflammatory response after like anything higher than 200 milligrams per week. So it just depends on what you specifically what you have a predisposition to be sensitive towards. So if we start putting all these steroids into which receptors they stimulate, then we start putting ourselves in the categories of I'm sensitive to one receptor over the other, or
Right.
one of these columns over the other, then we can start understanding which steroids will work for us, right?
And in the end, it's when people look at the steroid world, certainly, from the pro world right down to the average guy who's doing this, it's really trial and error, and
Yeah.
that's what that is.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And I think like the way we do things now, right, is that we really only check, the total androgen level, right? Maybe the free testosterone and sometimes the SHBG. When, as you know, there's probably 1,000 factors that
Right.
define how we're going to react to a specific androgen or a specific hormone or a specific protocol, and there's 1,000 factors that we don't even know about, right? So one
Right.
thing we're not considering is the receptor side of this. We only consider, okay, how much of this is in your blood? What's our dose? But what about what's equally as important as that is how are our receptors receiving all of these things? The affinity to each type of receptor, from glucocorticoid to mineralocorticoid to progesterone to estrogen, right? Like how are
This is the
receptors receiving all of these? So paying
That's going to
attention
be the future.
to that side of it, I think, could lead to a better understanding of how each individual will respond to different steroids.
And that's if we could really reopen up the anabolic steroid industry again, it would be done with that, with understanding all the anecdotal information for the last 50 years more, and then saying, yeah, we have receptors. Here's the basic chemistries. You could analyze someone to see, what their DNA is and how they
Yeah.
receptors may fall into, and then you could build a steroid, kit.
That's it.
This is, guys, I'm not doing this right now. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
So it's like, but this is the future, and it's just micro tuning based on fingerprints.
Yes.
For your brain. We know with psychiatric drugs, we do have studies that they do DNA studies, and they'll show you, and this is actually old news, that you can pick a better class of antidepressants to start with based on your DNA.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you just do the same thing for receptor relationships and
Yeah.
clinical outcomes with anabolic steroids? So Brian, Ryan, you're gonna get us there, brother, and we're doing it. So thank you so much for this super cool breakdown of dihydroboldenone and talking about modern biochemistry on steroids. We'll definitely have you back because this is such a cool show and topic to run into, and we have unlimited topics. So, guys, give us some ideas of maybe in the comments here. First of all, please, guys, give us all your anecdotes, further our understanding and this for men in the world to understand. They come here for education and really true openness and being ethical, to not put men down and to bash someone and to be discriminatory. You guys, if you're young, you don't do steroids because you're going to shut yourself down and you're going to be on testosterone for life. That's my number one. And then the rest of it is it's going to be a lot of work to protect yourself. And if you're willing to do it, that's your decision. But we have guys here like Ryan who are coming from the real world of where these medicines, these agents that not medicines, agents have come from the biochemical side and then clinically how they can be applied, because this is a new world and it's going to open up ethically. So we need your comments, and give us some comments of ideas of what you think will be good topics for Ryan and I to discuss on future shows. Thank you so much, guys. And Ryan, thank you so much, brother. I
Thank
do
you,
appreciate
Doctor.
it.
Thank you for everything you do.